We're on to the ward boundary review, and I believe we have, do you want to move it? Councillor Pearson, it's an update. Any seconder? Councillor Connolly, all in favor? Questions on 8.5, our ward boundary review update?
Yeah, I'd like to get an update, a verbal update, for those that are watching at home as to where we're at with that. I know there's a lot of people, constituents very interested in the equity of our democratic process.
So Tony, and you have some friends to introduce, I'm sure.
Yes, I certainly do. Through you, Mr. Chair, we have Eric Carvinen here, we have Gary Scanlon here, and we have Dr. Bob Williams here from Watson & Associates, who are doing the review on behalf of the city. So they'll proceed to the podium and answer any of your questions at this time.
So Councillor Green, we have the consultants, if that's fine.
Yeah,
unless were your questions for also staff or?
No, I'm looking for their high-level verbal update for the people that are viewing at home. We have the privilege of the reports here present, but for staff, for the viewers and or media present who might be interested in democratic reform, being very topical today, both at the federal and provincial levels.
Mr. Scanlon, is it?
It's Eric Carvinen with Watson & Associates.
Oh, sorry, Eric.
Yeah.
Carry on then.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Eric Carvinen with Watson & Associates, joined by my colleague, Dr. Robert Williams. We're here representing the consulting team that was retained by the city to undertake Hamilton's ward boundary review study. We're about halfway through our study currently, and we thought it was a timely opportunity to come to you here today to give you a status update on the project. Since we started the project back in the fall, we've gone through a number of phases of work, including background research, technical analysis, including population analysis and growth modeling, stakeholder consultation, and initial round of public consultation. We have a number of important steps and phases of work yet to complete before we wrap this up in the fall of this year. We have provided greater details on the work done to date and future phases of work that yet need to be done in the progress report that's been provided to you through the circulated agenda. An important next step in the project is an interim report, which will be released to the public later this month, which will present a number of preliminary alternative ward boundary options. These preliminary options will be taken to the public for their review and feedback through a series of open houses, which we are planning for later this month. With the feedback that we receive from the public, we will finalize the options and bring them back to you for your consideration later this year, likely in the fall. And of course, Dr. Williams and I are happy to take any questions you may have on the project status, work completed to date, and project next steps.
Of course, have that in Appendix A of what is before us. Councillor Green, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And so, as the consultants, you're now bringing back information based on your engagement with the community. What are there, if any, legislative requirements regarding the Municipal Act tied to population?
Perhaps Dr. Williams can speak to that?
If I may speak to that, I think the simple answer is none. The legislation makes no reference whatsoever to criteria for the determination of municipal electoral boundaries.
No best practices, comparables. So what triggers this then? What allows us to go down this path if there's no recommendations and or direction from the Municipal Act?
If I may, Councillor, there is no legislative provision, but there are best practices. There are judgments from the Ontario Municipal Board and other occasionally judicial decisions which have been brought to bear on the terms of reference for this particular review, and those are the principles that we're following in designing some alternatives. But there are no specific requirements spelled out in legislation or in regulation. This is all based on experiences drawn from other municipalities in Ontario.
Mr. Fallis wants to give a hyper-local response, I'm sure.
Yeah, there is, as Bob has referred to, there is case law, and it revolves around the effective representation that came out of the City of Ottawa. So it doesn't specifically address population, and it doesn't in the Act, but effective representation is something the OMB would look at.
And is the ruling included, will be included in the final report? Because, I mean, it's been my understanding, Mr. Deputy Mayor, case law particular to OMB rulings and such, I mean, if it's not legislation now, then it becomes something that's certainly arguable at the upper levels there.
I can tell you that the cases that are relevant will be cited. We had not planned to include the whole of the case unless there's some compelling reason to do so. But the decisions that are relevant, and as Tony pointed out, City of Ottawa, there's another case involving Mississauga where effective representation was an important principle. Basically, the story is it's not just population numbers. There are other factors to take into account, and we will be keeping that in mind in the alternatives that are developed.
Okay, well, even though it's interesting when you go from none as your short answer to other options and what effective representation looks like in other municipalities, Ottawa and Mississauga. Obviously, there was an impetus to go and have this review. So I would ask that at this time through you to the consultants that when you cite those cases to do so in a very clear manner, parameters of what an effective representation looks like, both the above and the below parameters that you, I think, listed here on page 2. Population data, the whole section there on page 2. I guess it'd be page 3 of 8 of the appendix. So although it's not just, it's not the only parameter, it's certainly a parameter. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep.
Yeah, certainly I know lots of people at home watching this with interest, trying to get a better understanding how, you know, there's some votes that count 3 times as much as other votes, and certainly be looking forward to having this process come back so we could talk about what our democratic deficit looks like here in the city.
Thank you, Councillor Green. And now let's go to the councillor of the ward that has a projected population in 2026 of 55,100. Councillor Whitehead, Ward 8.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I've already raised my concerns with the City Manager's office with this process in regards to a number of issues. It's almost like we're entering into this with, are you tired with, are you tired with this current configuration and needs to be fixed? An objective approach. So there's subjective and objective. I'm not clear the approach that our consultants are taking is objective, but I'm going to give you an example so that it's clear. On page 4, when and I think there's some good questions asked with the previous speaker. There are guiding principles. Yes. Representation by population is just one principle.
Correct.
Population and electoral trends, means and communications and accessibility, geography and topographical features, community or diversity of interest. Now, I got a problem because I read the Ottawa case in the OMB. I read the London case. He didn't cite the London case. I'm trying to understand, when I look at the Planning Act and it lays out the principles, it says community of interest. Yet, that is what is in the Planning Act. You say community or diversity of interest. Help me understand, did the Planning Act change and that is the principle now, or is it still community of interest?
Back to me. These principles were established in the terms of reference for this particular study. We did not design them. The terminology reflects the fact that the city is diverse in its interests, and the subheading there, if you will, or the follow-on text, is basically directing us to keep in mind those parts of the city that have interests in common, and in a sense to keep those separate from interests that are different. So it's what's included and what's separated, if I can put it that way. These are not drawn from the Planning Act. These are principles designed to help deliver effective representation.
So help me understand then, when you cite the Ontario Municipal Board, they cite the principles in the Planning Act. We are going out now and citing terms of reference and principles that are not even consistent with what is going to be heard by the Ontario Municipal Board based on what is in the Planning Act. So help me understand why we would drift away from what the ultimate decision maker could be, being the Ontario Municipal Board, why we would drift away from those pretty clearly defined principles.
Any case heard by the municipal board in relation to ward boundaries in Hamilton would not fall under the Planning Act, it would fall under the Municipal Act. What a petitioner might want to bring to bear in a particular case, whether that was the London one, I'm not sure. If someone wants to bring those principles to bear, it's up to the board to determine whether to accept them or not. They are not carved in stone. They are part of hearing a particular case. But the Planning Act per se was not part of the principles that we were given to use in this review.
Okay, so that's a question I need to ask our staff because, again, every case I've read cited the principles in the Planning Act or the Municipal Act. I think they're consistent when it comes to the principles. So help me understand. Are you suggesting then the Municipal Act has different principles?
The Municipal Act has no principles. In response to the original question from Councillor Green, the Municipal Act does not provide any principles to structure the form of representation in the municipality.
So thereby they fall back to the what is laid out as the principles in the Planning Act, and what we have here before us is not even consistent with that. So I want to highlight that.
Wait a minute. Doctor, did you want to respond to that?
No, I'll leave that.
So I want to, the other question I have, and I raised this, and yet it felt like it fell on deaf ears. That's the issue that currently we have a term called area rating. And we have a different tax level on transit, for example, in the outlying areas versus the former city of Hamilton. And clearly, I would suggest, respectfully, that that's a serious consideration in boundary review because you can't optimize the shifting of wards and have a representative representing two different, they would be in conflict. They would be representing two different tax regimes within their own ward. So I'm looking for a response. Do you think that should not be or should be a serious consideration in this process?
Look like you're trying to get my attention.
Oh, actually, I'm asking a specific question right now, Mr. Chair, and I'm not debating staff.
No problem.
I'm asking right now.
Who are you asking? Who? Maybe it'd be helpful if you. Is it the doctor again?
Well, I mean, I've raised.
Tony would like.
Yeah, let me just step in for a second here. The Planning Act doesn't address ward boundary reviews at all, but what I want to say is all these guiding principles is very similar to our cultural principles. There are underlying definitions and underlying pieces, I guess, that go with these. So we don't just look at these and determine this is all that we're going to go by is these 7. All other concerns are lumped somewhere in these 7, and we tried to make that clear from the beginning when we put these together, that don't lock yourselves into just what we have here. There are other things that are going to be looked at. As I say, I'm a little confused on the Planning Act one because it has no bearing from what we've seen. Yes, I've read the decisions of OMB and et cetera, but the Planning Act doesn't have a cause and effect on the ward boundary review.
So the reason I raised that, because if I remember and recall, and if I have to do cite and verse and bring it here so that I can remind my colleagues and staff, the OMB makes reference to some of these very principles. And one of the principles they make reference to is the community of interest. We're calling it community or diversity of interest, which isn't consistent with what the OMB has identified as one of the principles. And I just want to make sure that we're aligning some degree, if this gets challenged, with the very types of things that the OMB has made reference to as part of their decision-making relative to past decisions. So I want to highlight that because I've read very thoroughly that particular report. And I think there was London, and there was one other one I read. And they made references to those principles. They kept coming back somewhere in those presentations and came back and made reference to some of these principles. So what I see here before us is not a far stretch from those principles by any stretch of imagination. But certainly when I sit in the community and lay out those principles, it's not verbatim with those principles. So, and I don't know if that's going to cause or draw issues or problems, but certainly it concerns me that there seems to be an inconsistency on that front. But I did ask the question, I think you've now answered it in respect to the fact that I want to optimize at some point the boundaries. And at some point, it makes sense that we might be able to stretch those lines out to some of the current suburb areas. But what the clear impediment, in my humble opinion, is you cannot have a councillor representing two separate tax issues within the same ward, because you can't win on that.
To that question, and it's a good question. Doctor.
That is a form of diversity of interest that would be taken into account.
And just, I want to comment also on, to make it clear that keeping the status quo is an option at the end of the day. So we're not coming in here saying that you have to replace what you have with something else. Ultimately, this is a democracy, and we are going to be generating some alternatives to consider and evaluating those options against the status quo, and ultimately it'll be up to the City of Hamilton through City Council to determine what is the best choice for the city moving forward. But keep in mind that it's been 15 years since the existing ward boundary structure was established and implemented. We feel it's an appropriate time to at least do that review. And yes, there are issues such as the ones you raise related to area rating that is going to have to be considered, but also keep in mind that the range of options that are going to be presented in the interim report later this month will be quite varied. And just to keep that in mind, that it may not be necessarily dramatic changes that may be considered. It might be a range of options, and ultimately it's important that the city and the public have the opportunity to review a range of options.
Now, I read in the report, and I've obviously attended one of the largest consultations that you held. I didn't get to all of them. I heard some of them. So what was the average numbers that showed up to these consultations?
Well, we had about 190 in total, and we had about nine sessions in total. So we're looking at about 20-25 per event. Obviously, some were a little lower, some were a little higher, and we do expect that the numbers will be definitely higher in the next round of consultation.
Okay, so I just wanted to put that out for context purposes. The timelines remind me, and I'm sure it's here on the second phase.
Well, it's actually phases 3 and 4 are the next steps. What we have immediately coming up this month is the interim report, which will be released later this month, and that'll be combined with a series of public open houses throughout the city. And then after that, we will be taking that information and feedback that we receive from the public and finalizing those preliminary options that we were presenting, and bringing them back to you and to council to consider, and that we expect will happen in the early fall.
And the last question I have, and I think, and I don't want to paraphrase it, I can't accurately reflect it, but I remember it struck me, and it was a comment in regards to, at the presentation, in regards to Ward 12, I think, or not 12, the Robert Sudas area, the big, vast area, a low population. And it was almost being suggested by the presenter, wouldn't it make sense to combine that in one area? So I'm trying to remember. I remember it struck me odd that there was already almost a position being presented when that really should be coming from the community. So I guess the question I'm going to ask our consultants is, how many, you said that it's 15 years. You do this a lot?
Do we undertake a lot of reviews? Yeah, currently we're engaged in another 3 studies, and we've done over a dozen other studies over the last 5 to 10 years. Typically, certainly 15 years is a fairly long time to go without a review. Now, of course, it depends on many local circumstances on what's an appropriate timeline between reviews. It can depend on the rate of change and growth in a municipality, other local circumstances. Some municipalities may do it less frequently, some more frequently. So again, there's no standard rule of thumb other than certainly 15 years is an appropriate time frame for a review.
So there's 500 communities in Ontario. I'm trying to understand, so what is the average in all these communities? I'm just trying to get a context of how many wards boundary reviews have taken place in the last 10 years, and what is the average gap between reviews that currently has taken place in the province of Ontario?
Very hard to say exactly how many reviews have happened. I would guess there's probably, if you're talking 15 years, 35 to 40 maybe. The problem is many reviews are done locally and are satisfactorily resolved and become basically a local decision. A few of them are appealed to the municipal board. We know that that number is probably 10 or 11 in the last 2 cycles. There is no average. You're comparing peanuts to watermelons. There's no standard no standard period of time between reviews. As Eric has suggested, it depends on the circumstances. How fast you're growing, how you were created, where the growth occurs, things of that sort would drive the need to review representation.
Do we have any ideas how many reviews have taken place that the status quo remained?
If the status quo was retained and no one objected to it, no, we have no idea. It would be a strictly local decision. That's not terribly newsworthy, so you don't really hear much about those kinds of cases.
Appreciate it. Those are my questions.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you very much. Question to the presenter. You said you're going into phase 2, which you're going to come up with proposals, and you're going to do that sometime in June. So that's the next 3 weeks, next 3 to 4 weeks. That.
Correct.
Are we not going to get a chance to see what you're going to take to the public?
That's an excellent question. We will ensure that members of council will have access to the same public documents that will be released to the public at the same time.
Okay, I was hoping we'd have that today so that we could ask questions. As you can expect, this will probably be controversial what you come up with. And we need to be able to have conversations with you about what you're proposing, it out to the public, because I don't want to, and I can't pretend to know what you're going to say, but we don't want to unnecessarily harm the public.
Well, again, they are preliminary options, and the intent is to go to the public and to consult the public on what direction they would like to take, including the option of keeping the status quo. And there's certainly the same information, the interim report will be released to members of council at the same time as to the public, and so you will be privy to the same information as the public at large.
Councillor Tony Fallis would like to expand. Tony? Mr. Tony Fallis.
That's okay. Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we had many discussions over this and from the very beginning, and certainly want to keep this as transparent as possible. We want to put everybody on an equal playing field. And so it was decided that rather than maybe raise the air of the public by saying, oh, the councillors all got it first and they've had 2 weeks to look at this and come up with their ideas, that we want everybody on the same platform and same level. And so that was the reason for it being distributed at exactly the same time, that there wouldn't be any favoritism, or that the thought process being with some of the public that the councillors might have more input or more connection to the group that's doing this study versus the thoughts and patterns or whatever that may be from the electors and public themselves.
The terms of reference, Councillor, if it helps you, the consultants are operating independently from council and from city staff.
No, I get that, but they have our phone numbers to the public. Our email addresses. 2 observations through to you on the one I attended at Ancaster. First of all, it was well advertised. Ancaster News covered it. The Spectator and the Ancaster News ran ads about it. I put it in my column in Ancaster News, trying to get the public. We had 2 people from Ancaster show up. There was others there, but they were from other wards. But clearly, that sent a very clear signal to me that they're content with the current WARN boundaries. And also, Dr. Williams, if I can give you some advice when you're going to the public, you made a comment at that meeting when I almost fell off my chair, is that the city's been around for 15 years. We got to stop using the old community names. And I suggest to you that, to ask the people from Ancaster, Dundas, Waterdown, Stony Creek, Bimbrook, to ever suggest that they can no longer say they live in Ancaster will be a nuclear explosion. Don't go down that road. I mean, we're still using it. Streetsville, the old municipal names, because people are out of that. And I recognize, Dr. Williams, you live in Kitchener-Waterloo area, so you're not as connected to Hamilton as we are. But don't do that, because the people who live in Stony Creek are proud of Stony Creek. The people in Dundas are proud of Dundas. And people in Ancaster are proud of Ancaster. That's why they moved there. Yes, we should be getting rid of those names is something that I won't support here. Just in closing, my reaction when I only see 2 people from Ancaster there, I'm not going to use names, but one goes to everything, and the other has political aspirations, means with the status quo. That's how I interpreted that attendance. I know there was different attendance in different wards. I've talked to some of my council colleagues, and some had fairly large. In Ancaster, we had 2.
Oh, so you gave some advice to the doctor, and he looks like he wants to respond to that advice. You okay with that?
If I may, 2 or 3 comments. And with respect, Councillor Ferguson, I did not say that the name should disappear. I in fact, emphasized the fact that even if we change the ward boundaries, the communities will still be there. They will matter. What we're doing is drawing different lines to elect members of council, but we're not changing Dundas into something else. We wouldn't change Ancaster into something else. We're simply drawing lines to elect members of council that may be different than the lines that are there now. And we're not changing those other things. So if you heard me say that, with respect, that was not my intention. Second point is that, yes, there was low turnout at some meetings, and efforts were made to communicate that. But other than the 15 of you or 16 of you around this particular table, for a lot of people, this is inside baseball stuff. It's not something they get terribly excited about at that phase. There is a process of learning, there is a process of engagement that we are working through, and that's why there's 2 rounds of consultation to help build up that interest. And as Eric said, we fully expect that the meetings this month, we may be lucky, we may be standing room only, I'm not sure. But the fact that there was low turnout, I don't think is an automatic equation to the fact that everybody's happy. That's my opinion on how to read that.
Yeah, just one sort of follow-up comment to that, and that has to do with, yes, the initial phase of consultation may not have drawn that level of interest, but I do believe that in the next round here later in the month, where we actually will be presenting maps with lines on those maps depicting, preliminary options, I suspect there will be considerably more interest. And I certainly invite everyone in the public to come out and voice their opinions, either in support of the existing ward system that's in place in the city, or to express their opinion that they would like to see change and what change they would like to see. So certainly we invite everyone to come out, both those that are for the system that's in place now and those that are looking for change. And certainly at the sessions that we had in the first round, and we've indicated this in the progress report, that resoundingly we heard that people want change, that they see significant weaknesses with the existing system that's in place, and they would like to see change. Now, what that change is, it can be relatively minor to something more significant. And again, we will find out in more detail the feelings of the public once we present the preliminary options in the next round, the public consultation later this month.
Okay, a couple reactions. I've been an Ancaster councillor for 10 years and a city councillor for 10 years. It's been my clear experience that when people are angry, they show up. When they're happy, they don't. And we see that also in the planning meetings. Generally, when there's a rezoning coming, the people that show up are those that aren't happy with the application. Those that are generally stay away. And so that's why I made the comments that I did, that I interpreted that to mean they like status quo from my 20 years of experience. And also I appreciate, Dr. Williams, that you're going to be, tend to say that. I can't make this stuff up. I know what I heard. I know I just about fell on the floor. And I promised you at the start of the meeting I wouldn't try to get engaged in the meeting. But if you just be very careful about that when you're on your second round, I'd be appreciated.
I'll be as diplomatic as I can. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Skelly.
Thank you. I represent Ward 7, which is the largest in terms of population in the city. And if you want to compare it to, for example, 14, which is the smallest, the population of Ward 7 is 62,400, and the population of Ward 14 is 16,600. So it's quite significant. What are the advantages? First of all, is there an average size of a ward in city councils, in cities, municipalities?
Do you mean geographically or by population?
By population. Is there any sort of an average size that you've been able to determine for cities our size?
The average for cities of this size are the population divided by the number of wards. There's no comparison. You can't say that Hamilton's wards are one size and therefore this should be the same size in Burlington or Oakville or Mississauga. Each one is separate and distinct. So it's a formula that's based on the population and the kind of council, the size of council you want. So comparisons from Hamilton to other places really are not terribly helpful.
Through the chair, can you share with us the advantages and disadvantages of having such a discrepancy in the size of the population of wards within one municipality?
I'm not quite sure how I could answer that directly. I don't think about it as advantages and disadvantages necessarily. The reality is there is a wide difference. There is a sense that that difference should be reduced in some way, shape, or form, but there is no standard notion of what we would want to see happen. We work in, and you will see is in the interim report, we work with a measure, a kind of rule of thumb that we refer to as an optimal size, and we're interested in how much variation there is between that optimal size in a particular ward. But it's not driven by advantages or disadvantages. It's drawn by what the geography looks like, what the distribution of population is, things of that sort that would have a bearing on whether we end up with a ward of a certain population as opposed to another number. I'm sorry, I can't really frame it around advantages and disadvantages. That's part of what your evaluation would have to be around the status quo and around various alternatives that we propose. Is that variation acceptable or not?
Through the chair, would it not be fair to say that there are clear concerns about such a discrepancy in the population of different wards? I'm thinking just in staffing. I'm not saying it isn't equitable in Hamilton, but there would have to be clear concerns about having such discrepancy in the sizes of wards. For example, staffing, representation by population, and do people feel underrepresented? If they have one member on council representing 62 and a colleague has one representative on council representing 16. I mean, to me, there have to be some clear disadvantages to having such a huge discrepancy in the population of the different wards.
Those are the kinds of things that were revealed in the consultations that we held. There were some people who were very unhappy with that variation. Others were less so. I think it's fair to say that there is an awareness of that difference and a belief that it does have an impact, but how far you need to go to change it is part of the reason why we will offer various alternatives. A scenario that is based solely on population would look quite different from one that might attempt to respond to, let's say, a ward like 14, where the population is more dispersed and thin. It's a matter of weighing these off. The principles that are there are not they're not in hierarchical order. They are at play in the designs that come forward, and we will ask the community how well they work and which ones they think best serve the interests of the larger city and of their own community. What that sense will be, I can't say until we've taken them out to the community and looked for that feedback.
Thank you. Through the chair, have you been able to determine a formula, if you will, or a standard in terms of the size of a city, its own entire population, and the size of a council? Is there a more effective number that you've been able to determine? Is it a smaller council, a larger council? Is there an average that you can share with us that where we've seen a more effective council?
Once again, this is a question that really has no definitive answer. There is there's a philosophical view, if you will, that smaller units are better than others, but there's nothing required. There's a minimum size, but no maximum. So how large your council should be is really a determination around that horseshoe. Are 15 councillors enough? Are they too many? We would not come back and say it's clear, black and white, it must be this size or that size. We know that cities, a city like Toronto, of course, with 44 councillors, I think that's almost universally agreed that that's too big. But how large it should be, I'm not sure. Again, size does matter. Usually larger cities do have larger councils, but your neighbors just around the bay in Burlington have 6. They're, just under 200,000. They've made a decision to operate with a smaller council. It's not up to me to say that works well or doesn't. Some of you would know that better than I would. It's not something that we can put down in definitive terms as a goal.
Sorry, those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, good. I have myself on the list, and we're going to go to second time, Councillor Green, unless someone else wants to go first time. Pass the turn to you, Councillor Whitehead, if you don't mind. Just on the attendance, it was briefly touched upon. Are you keeping names, numbers, and are you seeing ward boundary groupies? I'm hearing that some are going to various reach-out sessions. Are you seeing the same faces in different places? And if so, how much of that are you seeing?
I don't think that we saw a lot of repeat attendees. I think generally the people who came out were from the local area where the venue was held. And certainly we've done our best to reach out to all geographic areas of the city, and we'll do so in the next round of consultation as well.
And it sounds like you're more confident that the next phase, which is...
Yes.
A greater turnout. What are the indicators that give you that confidence?
Past experience. It's picking up on Councillor Ferguson's perspectives. When people see a map, it's much easier to relate to, and people will say, oh, I'm now, under this suggestion I'm grouped with these people, under that suggestions I'm grouped with these other people, certain advantages will come from one another. Those, I think, are historically, in our experiences, tend to be easier for people to understand and are a much more tangible sense that the process is moving along.
I'll take the chair back, and for a second time, Councillor Green.
Thank you. And just to be clear on process, as I'm to understand, this was process begun some time ago by citizens. An agreement was made perhaps to hold off and allow things to unfold in this term of council. So we now have consultants, Mr. Deputy Mayor, who've gone out to the community, and I do appreciate terms of reference to keep it on a level resident-led process rather than having us just continue to gerrymander, which is seems to have been our history here. So given that these recommendations come back to council for our approval or not, if we choose not to approve the recommendations, what recourses do residents have to challenge this process and or the outcomes?
Municipal Act does indicate that citizens have a right to petition council to take action on representation questions. It also says that if council fails to act on that petition, that those same individuals can take the matter to the municipal board. If no one wishes to do that and you choose to leave things alone, that's the end of it. But any further appeal would depend upon initiatives taken by citizens of the city.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, then maybe to legal, does this process satisfy council's participation in the petitioning of the ward boundary review, or could a citizen still, despite the outcomes, despite our effort, the consultations, the consultants, could they still, no matter what, have the privilege or the opportunity, the remedy to go to the OMB?
So through the Deputy Mayor, following this process, if council does not adopt any change to the ward boundary, then there's not an ability of a single individual to appeal that decision, as far as I am aware, but rather it would be necessary for a petition to move that. In other words, it would be necessary for a large number of citizens to put forward a petition in order to be able to take a step. However, if at the end of this process, council does adopt a different configuration or some change, that is appealable to the OMB as of right.
Okay. And as I'm understanding, the preliminary number is about 500, I think, was the petition number threshold last time to make it relevant at the OMB?
Correct, Mr. Deputy Mayor. The Municipal Act says that I think it's about 1 or 2%, but 500 maximum from citizens.
Okay. And I just put that on the table, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just so that the residents who are watching, the people who are still interested in electoral reform and fixing our democratic deficit might be able to take this. Should we do nothing? It's always an option for council to do nothing and to keep everything remaining the same. But I do understand and fully appreciate the direction Councillor Skelly was going in, where people they look at the numbers and they say, geez, 16,000 in one ward and almost 16 in another, and it feels a lot like it's 3 to 1 for some people living in one neighborhood versus another. So that's still a challenge for folks, and I can imagine, regardless of where we go as a council, there's always going to be people who are unhappy. Where they decide to take it in whatever direction they decide to take it after is their prerogative. So appreciate the report today, and I'm glad that we were able to put it on the table and have the conversation rather than just receive it and have it go into the ether. Thank you.
Second time, Councillor Whitehead.
Context purpose, I want to make it clear that it wasn't a petition that was driven by the highest populated ward or the lowest populated ward. The petition was primarily driven by the lower city residents, primarily driven by lower city residents. We had the petition. You could clearly see the addresses. And so I just want to provide that in a way of context. So people that have the best or a good representation balance currently are the ones that asked for this review.
I really hope that, we can maintain this focus of yours, which is quite broad, Eric, and I look forward to hearing back from you in a little short while on what you say is, quote, a varied range of options, end quote, and that'll be coming to us soon. And effective representation, of course, is about so much more, quite obviously, than just population, and I'm glad we're obviously keeping that in mind. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Tony and Rose. Great work so far. Hopefully we get so many more people out in the next phase of consultation. Your presentation will now be received by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried.